Good evening, everyone. We'll go ahead and call the special council meeting for February 22nd, 2011 to order. First thing, as always, is roll call determination of a quorum. Charlene, if you would, please.
Peterson. Weifenbach. Davis. Hadcock. Kroger. Costello.
Here.
Quaker. Waugh. Brown. Mason. We do have quorum.
Thank you. Just a reminder, this is a special council meeting. That means no items can be added to tonight's agenda. There's only two things on the agenda. The first is the 2012 subcommittee's recommendation for the timeline for approved projects, and the second is for adjournment. At this point, I'm going to turn the meeting, as we always do, over to the council president, who serves as the chair for the 2012 committee. Mr. Kroger.
Thank you, Mayor. All of you should have an updated spreadsheet up here on the dais to look at, and I know they were all passed out to you earlier, so you've had plenty of time to look at them. Pauline, could you put that up on the screen?
Maybe.
Subcommittee met here a few weeks ago and went through the spreadsheet, and probably to explain it a little bit would be if you go up to the budget of 2011 and you go down to the uses of funds in phase 3, those are the projects that still need funding out of the last go around of 2012. And when you go through those, what we looked at was the ones that were ready to go to use those dollars up. And as you can see and are aware, is the arts facility, of course, that's been bid and is going to be going under construction, so we are going to have to fund that in 2011. The Canyon Lake Restoration Bypass System, that's another one that needs to be funded this year. Economic Development Funds, $255,489, that's another one that needs to be funded this year. Downtown parking ramp, we're looking at funding that at this point in time this year. The next two are the soccer field and ATA, and as you're aware, soccer, we pushed them back because they're still in the process of raising funds to be able to move forward. ATA, when we went through this, they really had not received any more funds to move forward, so we pushed them back also. Street reconstruction, that's another one that needs to be funded this year, along with the pet building and some parks and rec projects that all come out of the last go around of 2012. So with what that left us, we then went to the current go around of 2012 and plugged in the projects that are going to go under construction this year. And as you can see, part of that was Canyon Lake, Main Street Square, which is under construction, the airport terminal, which is under construction, economic development, which is divided into the next 5 years, Youth Family Services Kitchen. That one at this point in time really wasn't ready to go. Skyline, or the energy plan, I'm sorry, needs to be completed by the year 2012, so we had to plug that into the system here, along with Black Hills Vision, which we spread out over 5 years. So the bottom line is, after we did all that, looked at our bonding costs and that, this is what we come up with as far as moving the funding out for all these projects over the next 5 years. And I guess at that point in time, I'll just open it up for some comments or questions that anyone might have. Any questions, comments? Sam Quaker. I'll save you some energy, Sam.
Thank you, Mr. President. Are we being asked to make a decision on this tonight, knowing that ATA and perhaps some of the other groups affected by this are not able to?
That's a good question. Actually, what we need this evening would be the 2012 committee to recommend this, and then it'll go to legal and finance, and then we can start really having public discussion at that point in time, and then we'll move it through the system. Does that answer your question?
It does, and I'd like to state that I am concerned about the delay for the ATA project, and my understanding is they are concerned too, and so I would like to make sure that they have ample opportunity to discuss this issue with the council at Legal and Finance and the city council.
Correct.
So, thank you.
And actually, all the council members, I believe, got an email this afternoon from Randy Ross from ATA, and I believe the mayor is also spoken with him, so I'll go to Mayor Hanks.
Thank you, Mr. President. Yes, I had the opportunity to talk with Randy this afternoon. They were under the impression that the final determination was going to be this afternoon. I explained to them the process, that from this point, this was strictly a recommendation which will go to Legal and Finance, and then also on to the full City Council. I also explained to them, as all of our cash flow spreadsheets with 2012, they're very fluid. Some projects may not move forward. Other projects may need to move forward. He was very much appreciative of the fact that they were under the impression that this was a final determination tonight. So they're well aware that it will come back in front of Legal and Finance, in front of City Council. And I also assured them that, if indeed that they found some funding, the City Council has always been willing to take a look at adjusting to immediate needs. In other words, if they were able to come up with the matching funds to get the project moving, I assured him that the council would take a serious look at trying to get the funding just as soon as possible.
Thank you, Mayor. Anything else, Sam?
Yeah, I would like to say one more thing, and that is that, a decision of this magnitude, I think that it would have been a good idea for ATA to have been notified in advance and not have had to read it in the Rapid City Journal and wonder what was happening. So I think there was a lack of notification. I think that having 2 additional hearings will be a good thing. However, my opinion is they should have been notified up front. Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, in one hand, I don't really disagree with that, but you have to remember that within the last 60 days, I believe that they came forward to the council, and we had all of the projects that were outstanding come forward and give us a report. And at that point in time, they didn't really state that they were this close to getting their funding. So, well noted. And like I said, as we go through the process, there's going to be a lot more discussion on how these projects are funded. But the real bottom line is, for this year in 2011, we really don't have a lot of alternatives because most of those are already basically ready to be taken place. So, with that, further comments, Ron Weifenbach.
Thank you, Mr. President. And first of all, I missed this particular meeting, so for that I apologize. I do have some concern about maybe if recommending switching the Wilderness Park and the softball complexes from 2013 to 2014, as my reasoning for that would be to the softball people, they are ready to go with their project. They've been in conversations with in-kind exchanges to help see if they can reduce the costs, and also they have hundreds of kids out there that can't play. And if the Wilderness Park is put off for another year, I mean, it doesn't really affect that much. They still have the ability to use the trails and those types of things. So, and I'd like to, I don't know what the procedure would be would I move that at Legal and Finance, or, otherwise I understand the methodology behind all these other ones, but that's the only one I would like to see changed. So, Mr. President, I guess the question would be, do I make a motion here, or do I do that at Legal and Finance through the process, or I'm assuming there'll be more questions coming up later, so.
I guess at this point in time, Mr. Weifenbach, if you'd like to place on the motion on the floor for discussion and moving around, we can certainly do that. Pauline, I believe, has a spreadsheet up, so she can move it around. I think, as all of you are aware, the one thing that finance likes is what the bottom line is on every year of the program, and they don't like to go below $1 million on that. So that's one of the things we also looked at. Would you like to place a motion on the floor?
Yeah, my motion would be to just change the Wilderness Park and the softball complexes from 2014, 2013, just reversed the order in which they would be funded.
Do we have a second on that motion? Second. Okay, we have a motion and a second to change, I'm looking at my list here. Okay. So it'd be to take the Wilderness Park for $912,000 and move that to 2014, and then softball of 1.2 to 2013. Discussion on that motion, Aaron Costello.
Thank you, Council President. If I can't immediately be in favor of this. In fact, I was going to speak on the possibility of dividing up the Skyline Wilderness funding over the course of years. I know that Parks and Rec currently has some grants that are in the process of coming through, and if we have the ability to leverage the efforts of those grants by supplementing it with 2012 funding that they are due, we should seriously consider that opportunity. I guess my question would be for the city attorney, if I may.
Go ahead.
Jason, once Legal and Finance and the council approve the pay-as-you-go project plan, what is the process for readjusting the allocations?
Mr. Green?
Thank you, Mr. President. The process is the same as it is to set it initially, so it would require a meeting of the 2012 committee, recommendation to the council, and that typically would go through the Legal and Finance Committee on its way to council.
Well, on that note, I certainly wouldn't want to belabor this issue by lobbying heavily against this idea. I guess at this time I'll take a moment to speak to all projects, saying that this is a fluid document. As things change over the years, we have the ability as a council to readjust the fundings and the allocations as long as the pay-as-you-go stipulations are met. So I wouldn't be against any motion here, knowing that this is a fluid document and that we are able to change it as time goes on. I yield.
Mr. Costello, we'll go to Deb Hadcock.
I seconded that motion for discussion. I also, if we could have what pay-as-you-go means for this 2012 projects from our finance office and how that process works and how much we have in contingency if some of these projects move forward faster than we think, and how much money is in those reserves.
Pauline?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to apologize and ask you to repeat the question as we're trying to figure out the computer thing. So I just caught a portion of that.
It's okay, Ms. Pauline. Just an explanation of the process is pay-as-you-go to the council members and the general public. And the second is how much we have in reserves in case some of these projects go forward, because this is not set in stone. This is something, if we have projects move forward, what that reserve means for those projects that might move forward faster.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The pay-as-you-go program, what that means is we are going to take only the revenues earned on the fund to fund projects as we go for the next 5 years. In the past, the city has bonded for projects where that will give you, I think the last time we did a bond, it was over right around $29 million that we got for revenue, that we got the funding up front. So if all of the projects wanted to be done in that initial year, it was possible that we could do that with that funding plan. The council chose to do a pay-as-you-go plan where you have to be patient and the monies have to come in before the projects can move forward, just so that way we could get all of our outstanding debt through the 2012 program paid in full. Once that is paid in full, the next round of 2012, if the council at that time chooses to bond, we could get a very substantial amount of money at that point to be able to fund projects. So that's the first part of your question. Second part of your question, as I understand it, was talking about reserved, the amounts reserved for additional projects. There's a pink line on your guys' sheet, and for 2013, there's approximately $1.5 million in reserve for additional projects, and then in 2014, there's $1.9 million approximately. You also set up contingency funds beginning in 2012, and that in 2012, it's $280,000, 2013, $655,000, 2014 is $655,000, and 2015 is $670,000. So if you want to use either one of the reserves or the contingency funds, I believe what Mr. Green said is you would have to come back as the 2012 and reallocate those out in that manner.
I appreciate that. So basically, a 3.4 in reserves and then a contingency fund for any projects that might move forward faster.
Correct, and that's about $2.2 million total.
Okay, I appreciate that, Ms. Pauling. I think that kind of puts it where, when we had this meeting, that's why we figured if some of the projects came faster, or came forward faster, that we could move them forward and still be fair and with the process. That would include ATA and softball. And we wouldn't have to move them forward now, but we'd still be able to, if they came forward with grants and funding right away, we'd still be able to fund them. So we weren't trying to pick and choose on some of them. It just worked the numbers well, and we believe, again, if some of those projects come forward faster, we're good to go. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. On the Skyline Wilderness Park, Parks and Recreation does hold a recreational trails program grant. We were able to get that extended for 2 years. That grant will end in 2012. If the money is in 2013, I talked to the state granting authority this week. If the money is budgeted for Skyline Wilderness Trails in 2013, we're still able to use that grant as a matching cause towards that money. But if it's moved out to 2014, there's a year separation. The grant would end. We would spend that grant money, we would close down operations, and we would come back and start operations again in another year. So we could leverage the grant money with the 2012 money, if it was available in 2013.
Thank you, Jerry. Further discussion, Dave Davis.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to walk through this again just to be sure that we're all seeing the full value of the work that's been put into this spreadsheet in the past, and we don't just throw it out with the bathwater here over something emotional tonight. There's been a lot of work put into it, and first and foremost is the pay-as-you-go plan that we've chosen to go with this year is saving us quite a bit of money on bonding costs because we don't have a project that's of such size that we have to bond. But in the nature of pay-as-you-go, right off the bat, you identify that it is a fluid spreadsheet. There is no guarantee on any one of these years that that's exactly what the sales tax is going to be. So just in accepting pay-as-you-go, we're accepting the concept of it being fluid. That being said, excuse me, let's take a look at why we put the reserves and why we put the contingency fund into this formula. Number one, in case there were overruns on any of the bids. We've been concerned that in the bid environment that things might run high. We wanted to make sure there were some reserves. Secondly, was to ensure the fluidity of this package, that these projects would be fluid and we could move money from one to the other by having these reserves. Now with that, let's take a look at the years. In 2012, we have $280,000 in contingency. In 2013, $655,000, and in 2014, $655,000 for about $1.6 million. Additionally, on the reserves, in 2013, we've got $1.5, and in 2014, we've got $1.92 for a total of about $3.4 million. So between the reserves and the contingency fund, in those 3 years, 12, 13, and 14, we've got about $5 million that's fluid. I see no reason to upset the apple cart over 1.2 million or over the 912,000 on the Skyline Trail. The money is there. It's a matter of if the tax money comes in, we'll have the availability to move it and keep this document fluid. If it doesn't, we've got a whole nother issue, whether those projects get moved back anyway. And I think that's the reality we need to address, is that even if we plug these in as 2013 dollars, they're not guaranteed. This is pay as you go. So I think leaving the document alone makes the most sense. We've got the money associated, and we'll go from there. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go to Ron Weifenbach.
Thank you, Mr. President. And the reason I made the recommendation is because I've been on a council long enough to understand how these things work once the council moves forward in the future. This will be pretty much fairly set in stone document. And I understand that 2012 has a pretty good history of performance, and it looks like those numbers were used to be put in here. Mr. President, I have a question on the Parks and Rec project for $784,000. Or if it's $704, I guess I would ask Jerry, what are those projects, and why all of a sudden now are we talking about grants that never were talked about before?
Mr. Cole.
Thank you, Mr. President. Most of those projects are in the works and getting finished up. There are some playground project, bike path signage projects that are getting finished. I think the highest Parks and Rec project is the restroom at the skateboard park for $150,000. The Parks and Recreation Board worked on this diligently for a couple of years as our porta potties began to get destroyed and burned up over there. And they pretty much came to a conclusion they really didn't want to put a bathroom at the skateboard park at this point. The other projects are included in here, but I think they're under Public Works 2012.
Jerry, could you just explain the grant funding that you're looking at?
Okay. In the presentation that the Runners Club and the Bike Club made on each presentation, I know that they showed and talked about the grant that we already had in place.
Mr. Weifenbach?
Obviously, I missed it. I'd just like to explain what it is and why it hasn't been used before.
Mr. President.
Mayor?
Thank you. I think I understand the question that Alderman Weifenbach has. Keep in mind that $704,000 is a project that was approved in Phase 3. The grants that we're talking about tonight were actually part of the Skyline Drive project, and so they're not applicable to that 704. It's actually, those grants are actually applicable to the 912,000, Jerry? Mm-hmm. I hope that answers your question. I think that's what you're asking.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. But how much was the grant for? And you're saying it was part of the 2012 presentation, this grant?
Correct.
Go back there and look, and it was in there.
$80,000 is what we have for grant and matching funds to go to the Skyline project.
Thank you.
Any other discussion? Bonnie Peterson.
Okay. Jerry, I just have a question. Did I understand you right when you said, or I think you said, that if the Skyline Wilderness gets moved to the next year, gets pushed back a year, that will be a problem, or it won't really matter? You'll just have to kind of stop what you're doing and start up again?
Mr. Cole?
We can still utilize the grant in 2012. But what we're going to do is ramp up a construction agency, do $80,000 worth of work, close them down, and then bring them back a year later, or else go out for an RFP and bring somebody else back a year later.
Okay.
It would be nice to do a continuous project, but.
Okay. Thank you.
Further discussion on the motion, which is to take the funding for Skyline Wilderness Park and $112,000 and move that to 2014, and to take the $1.2 million for ASA softball and move that to 2013. Further discussion, Sam Quaker.
Thank you. I'm concerned about this motion for the same reason that I'm concerned about ATA having to wait until 2014. You know, unless all of these groups were notified ahead of time that this was going to happen, and that the organizations impacted by these motions would have an opportunity to be here, I have real concern about moving things around tonight. What I think would be a better thing to do would be to continue this and make sure all the organizations are aware of where they are at in the programming process, and then have that discussion. I mean, I think Alderman Weifenbach's motion might be a very good motion, but I think that tonight it's out of place without knowing how the other group would feel about having the funds moved around. Thank you.
Further discussion, Jordan Mason.
Thank you, Council President. I guess I have a question for yourself to start with after Alderman Quaker's comment about continuing this. Is there any need at this point to move forward and on any of these? I mean, is there a timeline that we need to make a decision right now?
I would say no, there's not. The only thing is, there really isn't a time frame. I guess the only thing about it would be is that all these projects would know basically when they would be funded and how quickly they need to get things accomplished so that could be done.
Thank you. I guess I'm also, after listening to a lot of the discussion of my colleagues up here, I am concerned about switching things around, and also with the letter from Mr. Ross and dealing with the ATA development. It seems like he as well, with that group, is interested in waiting for some time so he can come back to discuss some of those matters with us. It almost seems like, to me, that one of the wiser decisions is not to make a decision at all and to give it time. Of a lot of people, have a problem with patience, but this seems like a time that patience is needed. Thank you.
Further discussion, Aaron Costello.
Thank you, Council President. I'll make a substitute motion to forward the recommendations on to Legal and Finance without any minute, or as published.
Okay, we have a substitute motion to take the proposed plan to Legal and Finance for further discussion. Discussion on that motion, Ron Weifenbach.
Thank you, Mr. President. I was going to withdraw my motion earlier, but that's okay. I can deal with the substitute motion. But when this comes to Legal and Finance, I'd like to see all the ramifications of this Park and Rec's grant, when we applied for it, when we got it, what the uses could be for it. So if we can add that on there somewhere, or maybe. Thank you.
Thank you. Further discussion, Deb Hadcock.
Just to give a heads up, these projects that are having issues with these timelines, I would hope they would come to Legal and Finance and then the council meeting, and hopefully by then, if there needs to be a continuance or more discussion, I'm not opposed to having another public meeting on the 2012. So I don't think this is done by all means. There's 2 more meetings, and again, I'm not opposed to continuing it if we have to at the council meeting if we have more issues that haven't been resolved. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go to Aaron Costello.
Thank you, Council President. And just to clarify, my intent here is to take this on essentially without recommendation, but this is as it's published, so that's how we'll take it on. So thank you.
Mayor Hanks.
Mr. President, I'm going to go to Jason Green. I believe you're required to actually, as a 2012 committee, make a recommendation to the Legal and Finance Committee before they take it up. Is that correct, Jason?
Mr. Green.
That is correct, but as you all know, this would be a recommendation. The council would have full authority to alter it as you work through the process prior to final approval.
Yep.
So, Jason, will the motion on the floor stand?
My understanding of the motion on the floor was that it was to take to Legal and Finance the document presented. That would essentially be the committee recommending the document as presented. At Legal and Finance and at subsequent council meetings, you'd have the ability to make changes to that recommendation.
Thank you, Jason. Further discussion? Jordan Mason.
Thank you, Council President. Quick question for our city attorney, just to make sure, but we can make any sort of adjustments at that time and make recommendations at the Legal and Finance, and then again make adjustments at the next city council, correct?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Further discussion on the motion on the floor? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, motion carries with 1 no from Alderman Quaker. Second. We have a motion and a second to adjourn. All in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, motion carries. City council meeting will start in about 5 minutes.
It's not the newest one. Oh, it's not. Can I see the newest one? Well, it's not a copy.